All right, welcome to the Zealandisms today. I am still sick, so I hope you're having a good time, but I am going to try and solve my own sickness and maybe yours with some good old fashioned club admin drama. Okay, because there's a war brewing. There is a war brewing in the United States, and that war is basically MLS versus Inter Miami, or at least a contingent of MLS against Inter Miami. So the first thing to understand is that obviously in the first full season with the club, right? Because when he joined the initial team, Inter Miami was not that good. Inter Miami flew away with the highest point total in league history. They'd built this veritable super team, right? They won the Supporters Shield, which is given to the best record in the regular season. So they brought home a trophy for that, right? But they also they dominated the league, right? They made the league look easy, highest point total in league history. Obviously, that league history only going back about 20 years, right? We're not talking about 120 years of history here, but still to put together the highest point total ever, not even those Beckham LA Galaxy teams were putting up the point totals that Inter Miami was able to put together after they had an offseason to build a team around Lionel Messi. And that is the context. Well, the first half of the context. The rest of it is that Inter Miami is not as good this year. They're not bad, right? Montreal is bad. Atlanta United is bad. Toronto, DC United. Those are the bad teams. Or if you go to the West, LA Galaxy. Very bad. Right? These are very bad teams. Inter Miami's not there. But they also aren't going to go break the points record. They've only won 6 of their first 13 matches. They've lost 3 times. They've conceded 21 goals in 13 matches, which is absolutely concerning. And they're sitting in 6th. And even if they win their match in hand, they're still comfortably in 4th behind Philadelphia, Cincinnati, Columbus, all of whom don't have Lionel Messi. And so this year presents an opportunity that didn't exist in previous years for MLS clubs. Okay. This is an opportunity to get back. Because let's be honest, let's face up with how this works. Because this isn't MLS 20 years ago when David Beckham showed up. Right? This is a league that has developed more. I'm not going to pretend that it's a huge deal. But I am definitely going to say that it's a lot better than it was when these star players started showing up. And there is, as somebody that knows these people and works around these people, right? There is an edge, a certain edge to proving to when, those guys, when they come to MLS, that it's not going to be super easy. And then there's the whole idea of Inter Miami, which is a club that still hasn't really finished building its stadium. Took 10 years to get off the ground, has only been around for a couple of seasons, and understandably, as a result of not having that completed stadium, only being around for basically 2 years before Lionel Messi showed up and just made the club his, which he was going to make any club his no matter where he showed up, right? There isn't an established fan base in the way that there is in a place like Minnesota, for example, where there's been a team there for nearly 50 years playing in one league or another. Right. And there have been various teams in Miami, but Inter Miami doesn't embrace being a continuation of that. It's kind of this new thing, and it has become the superstar team. I mean, Luis Suarez, Jordi Alba, Sergio Busquets, Lionel Messi, they're all there. They're all getting a little old, right? Which is why that defense is so bad. If you watch Inter Miami play, it's really impressive how little they press and how little they move around, right? And I'm not blaming the guy's heart or their ability between the ears. I'm just saying Luis Suarez's knees aren't really what they used to be, right? He can still put the ball in the back of the net, but he's not out here closing down for 90 minutes. They look old when you watch them play, especially when they have those 4 guys out on the field. They look old. They look a little slow. I mean, even when Messi was young, he didn't press, right? That's not his game, and honestly, he shouldn't, right? So I'm definitely not blaming him. And there really isn't a lot of blame to go around because how much can you really press when you're like 50 years old? Okay, they have to build basically an entire team that is going to work to help them. But that's their challenge, right? And it's obviously not going swimmingly well. It didn't work particularly well in the playoffs, where they stunningly got eliminated in the first round as the highest seeded team, playing against a lowly Atlanta United team that had snuck into the playoffs in the first place and pulled off the stunner, right? But there is a difference in the fan bases in the United States. And Inter Miami, by even, I would say, even by American definitions, is a pretty plastic club. It's a manufactured club. That doesn't mean that it won't be that in the future. And it doesn't mean that it has a large international brand that will quickly accumulate larger and larger groups of fans. But when you were that new and that dependent on star power for your kind of very existence, it's impossible for people to at least not perceive it as a plastic club. And that's where we come back to Minnesota, who are having a pretty good season. They're second in the Western Conference. They have more points than Inter Miami does in the Eastern Conference. And Inter Miami goes on a road trip to Minnesota. There's one more thing you also need to understand is the United States is obviously a very big place. And while the cultural differences in the U.S. are not as large as the cultural differences within Europe, they still exist. And if you wanted to find the biggest possible cultural contrast in the U.S., Miami to Minneapolis, Minnesota would be pretty good, right? Those are two parts of the country that will fundamentally and probably always misunderstand each other and just generally not, get along. Different values, different kind of perception of life or whatever you want to call it, right? It's just very different people and very different culture in Minnesota compared to Miami. Not that one's better than the other. They're just two groups of people that don't really mix much. And they would stand out pretty obviously if you put a person from one place in the other, and they would likely be miserable, right? And so all of these factors combine to produce one weird magic moment. Minnesota wins. Minnesota wins by a lot. They actually win by 3 goals. They win 4-1 in this game. And then they post on Instagram, Minnesota being ahead of Miami in the table at the time. And they caption it, Pink Phony Club. Now, this is obviously a riff on Chappell Roan's Pink Pony Club, which is a banger, right? Blew out my vocal cords singing that at a wedding this past weekend. It's probably where I got sick in the first place. It's a good caption. Banger caption. Kind of caught me by surprise. Because if you have a fan say this, if you have somebody who's just maybe a Twitter, I don't want to say a troll, but like a content creator, right? Somebody posts this, somebody makes a video about it. Some Minnesota fans dancing on TikTok to Pink Pony Club, singing Pink Phony Club, right? To try and make fun of Inter Miami. That wouldn't surprise me at all. I would have zero problem with that. It would be banter. It is at least a little notable. I don't have a problem with this, but this is closer to the line than you'd think for me. Coming from a club account. You just don't see club accounts a lot calling other clubs that they're playing against phony clubs, particularly when they're the most popular club in the league. If you ask people in Timbuktu to name one MLS club, it might be LA Galaxy because of Beckham, or it'll be Inter Miami because that's where Lionel Messi plays. Right? Even if kind of at their core, the club is still developing into what it wants to be, it is still an incredibly recognizable brand that has now caught a stiff uppercut from a couple of people in Minnesota that have let fly, that have let fly on this. And I saw it and you kind of go, ooh, that's spicy, right? Coming from an official team account, and obviously it's still up. This was a week ago. That's spicy. And David Beckham wasn't going to take this lying down. All right, David Beckham replies. David Beckham, in some ways you could say takes the bait or kind of finishes the job here and goes, show a little respect, be elegant in triumph. Show a little respect, be elegant in triumph. And I'll just go out and say, I think both people in this situation are right. I think the admin celebrating this win, kind of putting Minnesota United on the map. This is a team that even though there's been a team in Minnesota for a long time in USL and NASL or whatever it was, they're a pretty new team in MLS, right? This is not an opportunity that the people of Minnesota, the football, the soccer fans in Minnesota have been able to take advantage of much. And they got very excited, and they're kind of stirring up a bit of a rivalry. And they went with the Pink Phony Club, and I think if you just let that go, you would have been like, okay. I don't think David Beckham's response here is bad either. He doesn't stoop to the same level. He tries to use his gravitas, his name, who he is, to be like, hey, look, no need to come at our club, right? Show a little respect, be elegant and triumph. You guys beat us, you triumphed, but we deserve some respect. It's a totally fair response. But what you might not have anticipated is now they went and lost to Orlando City, who then captioned one of their pictures, "Elegant in triumph." We've got war. We have war, people. MLS clubs are a little fed up with all the attention, with all the eyeballs that Inter Miami has been getting, and Inter Miami is vulnerable. There's blood in the water. They are not this impervious tank of a team that's putting up a points record in their first season altogether. They are limping, and they are losing to teams like Vancouver and Orlando City, who are now being able to celebrate this. And keep in mind, they're dealing with a significant number of Inter Miami fans in the stands, which always adds more to this, right? There's always an edge. There's always a bit of a chip on your shoulder, a bit of discomfort even, when you run into a situation where half the stands are people, especially at Orlando City, where you're in Florida, right? There are a ton of people in the stands wearing pink, cheering for Messi every time he touches the ball, right? And that is annoying. For lack of a higher-minded word, it's very annoying. And these MLS clubs are now venting their frustration. And there is becoming a bit of an Inter Miami against the world. But I would warn these MLS clubs that are getting involved in this. We know what can happen when Lionel Messi gets pissed off. And he's pissed. He's been complaining about MLS officiating too. You know he's seeing this stuff. He's got MLS teams gloating against him. This is Orlando City. This is Minnesota United we're talking about versus Lionel Messi here. And they're kind of getting the last laugh. You don't want to unleash Dark Messi. They're playing with fire. Dark Messi is what carried Argentina to the World Cup. You don't want Dark Messi. But I think MLS might get Dark Messi as we go through the rest of this season. And I think, to be perfectly honest, part of this, back to the football discussion we were having earlier, the soccer discussion we were having earlier, Inter Miami's going to need to change the way that it plays just a little bit, having watched them. And I think maybe getting beaten and teased might encourage them to change the way that they play, or at least not be as old at the start of matches as they kind of are. I'm not an expert, and Inter Miami can still go on and win the title. It looks like they're going to be fine in a playoff spot, even though they've lost a couple games recently. But these MLS teams are taking their shots. And David Beckham's firing back, and I love the passion. Support your club.